All right, so this is the recording of the presentation of Critical Social Justice, Christianity, and the Family that I did last week in Provo and Salt Lake. You'll notice in this video that the intro is from the Provo presentation because my good friend Ralph Hancock did the introduction for me there. And then I did add in from the Provo presentation the outro right at the end there before the Q&A, just to kind of tie it in and for the people that were there. Other than that, it was Friday night's presentation that is on the video. We had better audio, better video, better lighting. So that's the meat of it. In this presentation, apart from learning a little more about what critical social justice is, which I think is very important, we go over some principles. And this is where I think we need to really hone in on with this and understand the principles behind this and how they differ, how they contrast from those things that we know to be true, that we have lived ourselves, had our own experience with, and have been tried and true for us. And there are many of these principles. This presentation as a whole is a very condensed version of a workshop that I've already put together and a course that will be on the website at cwicmedia.com, cwicmedia.com, on July 1st, where we expound much more on all of these things, especially with the principles, the tools that we need to work with this, and then focusing more in on religion, Christianity, and on the family. Along with that, there will be some cheat sheets, I would say, cheat sheets that go over the principles somewhat. Something you can pull down as PDFs and print off or download to your computer or phone, and that you'll be able to use and get a clear understanding of some of these things that are focused on the principles and on the tools that I think will help you in conversation, it'll help you understand, will help you hopefully with family members and others where there's just so much upheaval from this massive cultural change that's coming through critical social justice. I hope that this is beneficial for you and that you can grab several things out of this that will benefit you and maybe your family members and others. Something that you can pull that can maybe bridge a gap here or there. Enjoy.
Greg Mattson is the founder of Cwic Media, a media company with the objective of supporting the church and its members through awareness, education, and faith-promoting content. He recently sold his wealth management company and now dedicates his time and effort to Cwic Media. I've been thinking of selling my wealth management company too, but first I'd have to have one, so that plan is not progressing. I have to say that I have great admiration for Greg's work and the way he goes about it. It is an eminently useful, indeed, and urgently needed undertaking. I have been very impressed by the prodigious productivity at Cwic Media, including gospel study, our Come Follow Me series, as well as podcasts examining the interface between Restoration Christianity and the world, the politics and ideology, the increasingly crazy politics and ideology of the world out there. We all know that this interface is challenging, even disturbing. This connection between the church and the world is fraught with intellectual difficulties and spiritual dangers. Greg navigates this hazardous terrain with calm assurance and incisive thinking. He manages to be both polite and fearless, ready at once to give influencers who, let's say, we're pretty sure, speaking for Greg and myself, for example, influencers who we're pretty sure are probably wrong and maybe even quite dangerous. He shows a willingness to give them the benefit of the doubt as far as their intentions and character are concerned. And at the same time, he's ready to speak the plain truth plainly regarding the serious threats posed by ideas that subvert the truth, by ideological wolves disguised as mild and compassionate Christian sheep. By speaking important and potentially unpopular truths plainly, Greg is providing a great service to Latter-day Saints and others, and to Brigham Young University and its sister universities in particular, because this vexed interface between the church and the world is all too much at stake at BYU, for example, at this very moment. Cwic Media currently has over 30,000 followers and millions of views and downloads through its platforms. Greg has spoken to legislatures, parent organizations, and currently has an affiliation with a national organization fighting critical race theory. In addition to his content on culture, he has developed a system of gospel study filters he calls Cwic interpreters. Cwic, by the way, capital C-W-I-C, is an old English word that means intelligent and alive. I think Greg has chosen a great name for his project, and this evening promises to help us to be both more intelligent regarding the ideological tectonic plates that are moving beneath our feet, and more alive in Christ. It is a great pleasure and an honor to invite you to join me in welcoming Greg Mattson to share his thoughts with us.
First of all, thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. It's a Friday night and you're here, so I appreciate you making that decision to spend this evening with us. What I want to do tonight is I want to focus in a little bit about why we are where we are today. And so I'm going to go back in time a little bit. We're going to take a little bit of a journey. I'm going to go through it fairly quickly. We're going to run through some characters and some concepts, and then we're going to arrive at today. And the reason I think this is important is because I don't think that when I say the word woke or social justice, you know, there's an idea of what that is, but there's not a real good idea of what that is. And so I want to educate a little bit. I want to create some awareness, and I would like for you to be able to take from this some principles that I will cover that will help you distinguish the ideas of critical social justice with truth, right? And if we go through a few of these things, I think you'll be able to better articulate your positions and recognize these things. I'll give an example of this. I get a lot of emails, and a lot of emails go something like this, right? A mom and a father, they go to, let's say, BYU, right? And they drop their daughter off. And I'm paraphrasing, but this is a specific email. They drop their daughter off at BYU. This is pretty much a standard daughter that would go to BYU, right? She's been president of the seminary. She's involved with in sports. she checks all the boxes, kind of like you have to do if you want to go to a place like BYU. And she gets dropped off, and 2.5 months later, she comes back for Thanksgiving. And all of a sudden, something is very different. And she speaks differently. She has a different language. She has different words. There's a distance between her and her parents. And to the point that there are things that the parents do which are racist or homophobic or a number of different things that she has never said before at this point. She goes back up to school, comes back for Christmas, same thing, even more intense. She keeps talking about certain professors that she's really close with and a new set of friends that she's very close with, a new network. In fact, the professor introduced her to several of these friends, right? Some of the professors would introduce them to several of these friends. Now, she goes on, and a couple years later, it's more of the same. The parents are kind of like, well, she's going to college. I guess I'll try and, accept this, and she's becoming an adult. And but a year and a half later or so, she's She comes out as bisexual. Her roommates come out as bisexual in the same semester. Quite a coincidence. And she tells her parents that she no longer wants to be a part of the church, that the church is patriarchal, it is oppressive, and in many ways it's evil. Now, the story I just gave you is one that I have had several dozen emails from parents, desperate about what is going on. And here's the pushback that I would get oftentimes on something like this. Well, Greg, this is typical of going off to college, right? There's new ideas, there's new exposure, they're out of the nest. This is part of becoming an adult. Or something along the lines of, if they're not really supporting the church, right? They might say, well, this is what you get when you actually take them out of the ideas of the church and put them out into the world. Of course, they're going to discover these things. But there's something that has changed over the last several years that is very different from previous experiences like this. Number one is the volume. The number of times that this is happening, I'm going to guess that probably most everybody in this room has experienced this with a family member or a neighbor in their ward. It used to be that would be every once in a while, right? I look up something in church history. I'm learning now about the internet comes around in the 90s. You go through the church history and you find some things and you're like, oh, what is this? That's not the case anymore. That's not what it is. There is a new ideology. There is a new mode of thinking. There's a new religion, really, that is happening out there. And this is critical social justice. It's happening at breakneck speed also. And a lot of people feel very overwhelmed. I believe that this is an axial moment, like Nibley would have said. This is an axial moment in our history. You have the convergence of technology and the dramatic change in culture, right, coming together at once. And so we don't recognize everything that we see here. Tradition is very different from what it was. In fact, it's going away very quickly. There is a brand new change in how people see the world, based on media and primarily education. Remember, it used to be that 40 or 50 years ago, there was a decent percentage of young individuals that would go to school, that would go to higher education. Now look at the volume, right, with federal loans. The volume of those that run through academia and their religion, the numbers are very, very high compared to what they used to be. So you're sending your kids off to school, they're going to higher education, but they're not just learning about math, they're not just learning about history, they're not just learning about a certain profession, right? There is something much more important to certain professors and certain universities that they need to learn, that they need to be socialized into, which is the religion of academia, which is critical social justice. You might see things like this. K-12 students are becoming activists, drawing on lessons from historic fight for ethnic studies. There's something that is really important to understand about critical social justice. Here's another argument that I get a lot, people that try to push back on what I'm doing. What's wrong with teaching something new? They're going to college, that's supposed to be open-minded. You go out and you learn these different things, bring them in, right? Learn about it and have critical thinking about these things. That's not what's happening. I want you to imagine there's a religion class at BYU, I think it's still there, called World Religions. And so you go through the class and you go through Mormonism, you go through Christianity, evangelicalism, you go through Islam, you go through Buddhism, Sikhs, etc. Well, imagine at one point there, let's say it's Islam, the teacher doesn't just tell you about facts and information about the religions, they actually try to recruit you and activate you into that new religion. They are indoctrinating you. They have you read certain things. They introduce you to certain people. They give you new tenets. They tell you why what you're learning now in your current church is wrong and oppressive and patriarchal. Do you see the difference? See, I can go to a class. I wish Marxism was taught more. How many of our kids have learned about Lenin and Stalin and Pol Pot, right, and Mao? We never hear about these things. So they go through there, they don't learn about the tens of millions of deaths and suffering and poverty and famine, basically, that these ideas in the past have brought about. And then when they're given these same ideas under different names, they don't recognize them because our civics have been so horrible at teaching these kids these things. But the thing about this is, like I said, when you say activists, when they become activists, this is a major tenet of critical social justice. You must activate everybody around you. It is evangelicalism. It is a religion. You convert, you activate, and you have them go and do the same thing. It is a major part of this movement and this ideology. This is from the NEA, the National Educational Association. This is the largest labor union in the country. They are a teachers union. Black Lives Matter at School is a major program. They have partnered with Black Lives Matter. What is a teachers union doing partnering with Black Lives Matter? Why would they be political? Well, because they need to get certain information into the kids. That's what they're focused on. What are the demands? Part of this, mandate Black history and ethnic studies in K-12 curriculum. What is ethnic studies? Ethnic studies is not primarily about race. It's not about other cultures. It's about ideology. The Trojan horse is the race and the culture. You can go to any ethnic studies courses in any K-12 program anywhere in the country, and they're not going to learn about anything that is moderate or on the right. There's nothing there. It is all radicalism. All of the references, all the books, all of the icons are the radicals from the 60s and the 70s. All of them. You guys just passed this bill to bring in ethnic studies into K-12 in Utah, right? And here's why I say oftentimes, if you've heard the podcast, this is not a left-right issue. You had mostly those that would be considered conservative and Republican that checked this off and pushed it right through. This is not a left-right issue. This is a new ideology. And it needs to be attacked. It needs to be confronted as something very specific. And we must have an education of what is going on with this. The NEA, by the way, I'm going to get to them more in a second. Well, you know what? I'm going to wait for this. We're going to get to that in a second, a little bit more. You see other things like this, Introduction to Anti-Racism. This is a course taught at a university. Well, that's not surprising these days. You would probably see this, but what do you see there in the email address? What does that say? BYU Hawaii. So I'm going to show you in a minute what it really means to say anti-racism. Most people don't follow this. It is more of a bumper sticker, but this is taught by someone who is a separatist professor at BYU Hawaii that wants Hawaii to separate from the United States because it is patriarchal and because it is oppressive, right? He is a Marxist. He puts this out on his own social media. The administration at BYU Hawaii is in complete agreement with him. Complete agreement with him. This is happening at BYU Hawaii. And I'm happy to put it out there. I've already done it. I'll show you a reaction to this here in a bit. Or how about this? The LGBT testimony and the limits of trust. This is on NIH, the NIH, right? This is the National Institute of Health. The National Institute of Health. This is from the Journal of Medical Ethics. I'm going to read you the bottom line here. Moreover, taking LGBT patient testimony seriously also means that parents should lose veto power over most transition-related pediatric care. What is happening here? What is this? There are efforts in almost every state to make that happen. Okay. What is critical social justice? I want to go over a few terms here. We're going to hear critical race theory often. It's oftentimes used in place of critical social justice. I'm going to show you why I like the term critical here in a minute, why I tend to use that quite a bit. Identitarianism is very important to understand. This is all about identity. It's all about identity and liberation. It's the liberating of your identity. Wokeism or wokeness, and then one of my favorites, the religion of academia. It used to be in our country that we'd be worried about the culture changing. And the culture was coming from Hollywood, right? Or media, we might say, overall. That is not the case anymore. We need to know where this is all coming from. It's coming from academia, and there's a reason for that. It's actually always been this way in the past when academia has taken over, right? That's what's happened today. All of our culture comes from academia. Our Hollywood today and the news media and everybody else, they are all playing the song of it, what they get out of academia. To understand this, I'm going to run through several hundred years real fast, all right? I don't want to bore you. Immanuel Kant, he begins to talk about critique. It's a very important word. This all carries through to today. Now you see the German writing of that right there. There is a different connotation in German to critique than there is in English, and he wanted to distinguish that very clearly. Critique, K-R-I-T-I-K in German, has much more to do with the idea of crisis than it does in the English maybe criticism. Crisis. What is the crisis? The crisis is that there are problems in our life, in the world, especially with humanity and society, and they must be changed and fixed. That's what critique is about. It is about change, right? It's about change. Move on from there, we get a successor to him is Hegel. You notice these are all German philosophers or German-speaking philosophers. And we get something called the Hegelian dialectic. All of the left follows the Hegelian dialectic today, to some degree or another. Here's how it works. He's building off of Kant, who used to talk about, like, between me and this chair right here, there would be my perception of what that chair is. What do I really think this chair is? What is the reality of what that chair is? Well, everything that's in my mind that I've been socialized with is going to interpret what this chair is. Well, if we can get rid of all those perceptions that are between me and what the reality of that chair is, then I can be one with real reality. Hegel was very spiritualized in that manner, very, in many ways, religious, very metaphysical. This is the religion that we're talking about. See, the idea is progress to that reality, which is a utopia, kind of a pseudo-Zion, so to speak. That's what they are moving toward. That's what they want. The Hegelian dialectic will be this. Where we are today is our thesis. That's the status quo. It's the thesis. We want this out here. That's the antithesis. What we settle for is something in the middle somewhere called the synthesis. Okay, so now, here I am. That's the antithesis over there at the wall. Now, I settle here at the synthesis. I just moved over here. As soon as that happens, the new thesis is where I'm standing. And now there's a new antithesis. I'm going to head toward that. The synthesis is somewhere, oh, maybe about right here. So now I'm over here. You might think of these as goalposts, right? So now I'm going to move over here. See, the idea of this is that you're always moving toward that end. There is never any stopping. So the idea that, for example, you're always just going to react to what's happening, you will always be in a position of reaction to those that are doing this. It'll never stop. It will never stop, right? Aufgehoben. Aufgehoben is a German word. It's funny because if you look through the translations of this, it's usually, ironically, comes out as cancel. Canceling, okay? Aufgehoben is what Hegel said we'd get to when me and reality, me and the chair are one. When me and the chair are one, that is aufgehoben. It also means some other things. It basically more means than cancel. It means repealing, removing, right? So that I'm actually now able to be here. I move all those forms, I move all those filters away, and now I am one with that chair. The critical social justice is built on this system. That's what it moves toward. That's why they freak out so much if anything gets held back or pulled back and they lose an election, for example. and the whole world is going to end. Because guess what? That dialectic was just interrupted. It was stopped. It's like, what is going on? No, see, they have to keep moving toward it. They move toward it. That is what that mentality, that ideology is built on. For me, I put in a different word. And I'll show you why as we go through this. To me, it's liberation. It's the term liberation. So between me and the chair, as these get removed, and I move through that dialectic, that synthesis over and over again, I am actually liberating myself and humanity from the perceptions and the things that are holding me back of getting to Aufgehoben. It's liberation. And that's what the philosophers pick up on. That's what they start using, that term liberation. Marx, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but what you get with Marx obviously is victim and oppressor. That's a big part of it. You have the proletariat and you have the bourgeoisie, right? And Marx is interesting because he actually spends a lot of time in Paris. He goes there and he spends time, that's where he really gets into socialism, what we called it back in those days. And before that, he was a young Hegelian. That means he was with a large group of people that would focus on Hegel's early period of time, things that we just went over. And he adopts those things. But you see what Das Kapital's total name is, right? That he writes, Kapital, a critique of political economy. He's taking the German word of we must have change. There is a crisis in place. And so change must happen. It is no longer the idea with the Germans here of philosophy as something you're going to analyze. This is not Aristotle. This is not Socrates. Let's figure out how the world works. This is we are changing the world. He's focused on economy and science. 1917, October, Lenin comes around, the October Revolution causes all sorts of problems, civil wars, eventually the Soviet Union grows, but it's through a lot of pain and suffering and death. Gramsci is a Marxist, and he sees this, and he doesn't understand why the West is not jumping at communism. Why aren't they jumping onto this? Because they always believed in that liberation, in that Aufgehoben. If the workers would just understand this, they can be liberated from the patriarchy, they can be liberated from all oppression, and they will automatically rise up, but it didn't happen. It did not happen. So what he decides, what he figures out, and he's right, he goes to prison because he's under Mussolini. The Marxists didn't do real well under Mussolini, right? So he's in prison, he writes the prison notebook, and he decides that what has to happen is we have to change from an economics framework to a cultural framework. We must go into the culture, and he had 5 pillars that had to be taken over. They are law, media, education, family, and religion. Right, doing a pretty good job on that. We're going to cover family and religion in this one here. At this point, a number of scholars in Germany, they grab onto Gramsci's words and what he was doing. And they decide that they're going to go ahead and start really focusing on this idea of moving things to culture instead of economics. Marx was wrong. They call that now, even today, raw Marxism, as compared to cultural or neo-Marxism that you would have today. The Frankfurt School was in Frankfurt. They moved because, again, the Marxists didn't do real well in Germany under Hitler, right? So they leave and they come here. They come to the United States. They end up at Columbia University, affiliated with Columbia University. And this is where we get the beginnings of intellectualism and the academy in the US taking on these Marxian tenets, where we get when we come up with critical theory. The Frankfurt School, this is Horkheimer and Adorno. Horkheimer basically said about, they come up with critical theory, again, critical, change, right? Horkheimer says, and I'm paraphrasing, but a critical theory is anything that liberates mankind from the oppressors. Again, there's our Aufgehoben. It is liberation from everything around us. We need to be free, right? One of one of these, finally later on, as they've been here a while, they're at Columbia. They move over to San Diego because they want to be closer to Hollywood and make a change there. Marcuse, probably the man most responsible for who we are today, or what we have today in our culture. Marcuse is a Marxist that he runs it's basically an institute, but he runs the Frankfurt School for a number of years. He had something where he wanted to pull Marx on one end and Freud in on the other. And you know how physics is? There's this idea in physics that you have the theory of relativity, and you have string theory, and there's a movie made a little bit about this. If you can pull these two together and make everything work, you'd have the theory of everything, right? Everything would fall into place. You would see all of these things. We would understand the world completely if we can get the theory of everything nailed down. That's very similar to what Marcuse is doing here. If I can bring Freud and Marx together and make these work, we're going to have this philosophy and this view of the world that is the theory of everything. But the interesting thing about Freud here, what did he really primarily work on? Right? What was our identity? What was our oppression? Right? It's sexual. What is holding us back sexually? It's sexual liberation, right? Which had a lot to do with throwing off the patriarchy, which had to do with identity, right? That's what he was all about. We need to throw off anything that holds our sexuality and our sexual identity back from us. And we need to do it with Marxian tenets. And he was extremely successful. He's the father of the New Left in the 60s and the 70s. All of the protests and everything that's going on in the 60s and 70s on the universities is primarily because of him. He's the guy. He's the thought leader at that time. Now, he mentored someone by the name of Angela Davis. And Angela Davis is still around today, still preaching. It ran twice in the Communist USA Party for the vice president position of the United States. Lost both times. And is a big proponent, one of the top proponents of critical social justice today, anywhere.
And so when I was looking at the last 50 years, and I was looking for someone who could truly serve as a model for anti-racist thought, I couldn't see anyone better than Angela Davis.
We're going to end with Kendi here in a minute. All right? So Ibram Kendi, the top icon, the most commercially successful critical race theorist out there today, his number one example of an anti-racist today is Angela Davis. He wrote an entire chapter on her in one of his books. Oop. Oh, that's all I had to do, okay. We come along to postmodernism. Just a few important things here. Jacques Derrida ended up at UCI. He said toward the end of his life, my entire life has been dedicated to creating language as a virus. Right? My entire life is dedicated to creating language as a virus. So as we can see what's happened with that. We can see what happens with language. As language enters in, it's pregnant with different meanings. He was excellent at doing this. Postmodernism is everywhere in the academy today. Deconstruction is what he's responsible for. Lived experience. Have you ever heard the term or the phrase, my truth? This is my truth. Okay, this is postmodernism. There is no absolute truth. There's no absolute truth. There is only relative truth. There is your truth, and there is my truth. And if that's all there is, then all it comes down to is power. Can my truth trump yours, or will your truth trump mine? Right? It comes down to power dynamics, and that's how it's seen. Do we need to take a break? We're good, okay. All right, this becomes very important in understanding language. And this becomes very important in understanding that if there is no, you've heard the 2 + 2 = 5, right? Postmodernism. That's all postmodernism. What about my identity? Well, whatever I feel, I am. And you better accept it. Kimberly Crenshaw is the one who coins the term critical race theory. She studies under Derek Bell at Harvard. Her and Derek Bell are really the primary two, mother and father, we'll call it, of critical race theory. Comes out of critical legal studies. Again, look at the name, critical. See, this is a complete DNA of where this is all coming from. It's the same thing. Just put race in the middle of critical theory from the Frankfurt School. She comes up with intersectionality also. She writes a paper called Mapping the Margins. And this is basically taking critical race theory and just adding other identities into it. So if I am Latino, not Latinx, if I'm Latino, if I am a woman, if I am disabled, right, if I am gay, all of these things are the intersections of all my different identities. And the more I have of those identities, the higher I am going to move up on the intersectional ladder. And you can see that happening culturally very quickly today, very quickly, especially with social media. All the support. It's one thing to say, okay, I support someone if you have same-sex attraction, if you experience same-sex attraction. Okay, let's work with this, right? But it goes well, well beyond that. Our entire values are beginning to switch as far as what we put at the top of that ladder. A couple things from Richard Delgado, also one of the original critical race theorists. 24 of us gathered in Madison, Wisconsin, so we gathered at that convent for 2.5 days around a table in an austere room with stained glass windows and crucifixes here and there. An odd place for a bunch of Marxists, and worked out a set of principles. Then we went our separate ways. Most of us who were there have gone on to become prominent critical race theorists, right? This is the founding of this. This is where they're coming from. Now, Ibram Kendi, here we are today. How to Be an Anti-Racist, one of the most popular books that's sold today. There are training programs in most Fortune 500 companies built off of that book. That book has been sold at Deseret Book. I think they might have removed it after one of my podcasts. Thank you. They've added another one. It's back up there. So it's the 400-year one is in there. I think it's only online. I don't think you can walk into them and see it, but I think it's only online. But Ibram Kendi then is from this whole he is the critical race theorist. Right? He's the critical race theorist. Nobody has been more influential. Nobody has sold more books. Nobody has more speaking engagements than Ibram Kendi. You're going to learn a little bit more about him in a minute. What else did Richard Delgado say? The critical race theory movement, this is in his book, Critical Race Theory, is a collection of activists. This is not about a theory. It is a movement, and these are activists and scholars engaged in studying and transforming the relationship among race, racism, and power. Again, the hub of this is in academia. Unlike traditional civil rights discourse, which stresses incrementalism and step-by-step progress, critical race theory questions the very foundation of the liberal order. This is small L. This is liberal democracy. This is the Western world. Including equality theory, which is more along the lines of pluralism, equal opportunity, legal reasoning, the Enlightenment rationalism. They push back very hard on the Enlightenment, and neutral principles of constitutional law. They do not believe that the Constitution should have one standard for everyone. Different groups need different laws, and they work toward that. Oh, by the way, with this, I think one important way to understand this and to look at this is one side you have, in the 60s and 70s, you had Martin Luther King, right? Some questionable things there, some questionable funding, but overall, he's a civil rights guy. Don't look at my skin color. Don't look at the color of my kid's skin color. Look at our character, right? I have a dream. It's color blindness. It's color blindness. It's neutral laws. It's just, hey, we have to live up to these. You're not living up to these for us, right? The black population in the United States is not getting a fair shake. But he based it all on the Constitution. It's that we weren't living up to those ideals, right? That's one side, that's civil rights. This is not civil rights. When they say the new civil rights or anything like that, that's language. They don't believe in civil rights. They are hard at work right now trying to change the civil rights laws because they don't work. They're losing battles legally because of civil rights law. On the other side of Martin Luther King, you had the radicals of the 60s and 70s, Marcuse and others, Angela Davis. They lost. They lost the battle at that time to civil rights and Martin Luther King and the culture. They never went away. They never go away. They sit in the university and they grow and they grow and it mastatizes and mastatizes, and then we get George Floyd and here we are. Charles Mills, a prominent critical race theorist, a collection of essays. He put together a collection of essays on critical race theory. Again, real easy to explain what's happening. From class to race. From the classes of Marxism, of raw Marxism, to race. This is the religion of academia. It is a religion. The goal is Aufgehoben. This is what they are after, which means the liberation of man over all things. Over marriage, over family. Those are oppression. Those are things that are going to hold you back. Any kind of authority. That young girl in that email, and many others, it's easy for her to begin to turn against the church because it's an authority figure. It's very natural, not only because it's an authority figure, but also because the professors are telling them to turn against the church. Right? If I'm out there and all of a sudden I'm looking at the world as oppressor versus victim, I look at everything around me, all the institutions, well, there's the church. It's very easy then at that point to naturally move to that. And that is why we are losing so many people in the church today. It is identitarianism. It is the religion of academia. Even with church history. If you go back and look at church history, it's no longer about, well, how is the Book of Abraham translated, right? Or the Book of Mormon translated? What about polygamy and all these other things? You know what? Even looking at those things, you know what the biggest issues are? Was Joseph Smith part of the patriarchy? Was he a misogynist? See, it's identity. Or Brigham Young, he's a racist. See, it's going through a new filter. It's identity. It's like a hydra. This is how I look at it. You have the body here, which is critical social justice. All of the different heads that you have here. Critical race theory, probably the biggest of them all. But you have fat studies, you have women's studies, you have queer theory, all of them, right, that are up here. They're basically like all the departments of a university, except for maybe engineering. If you cut off a head, it doesn't matter. Another one's going to grow. You have to look at what is underneath all of these things. Race is not the issue. Sexual orientation is not the issue. It's this. This is the ideology underneath all of this. Those other things there are Trojan horses. That's it. That's all that's happening. And the way you can know that is because of identity. Thomas Sowell, he's not black. See, it's an identity marker, but he's not black, right? Or Justice Thomas, yeah, he's not black. Wait a minute, what? See, it's not race. He has the wrong ideology. He has the wrong thoughts and the wrong ideas. Peter Thiel, someone I really like and follow. Gay, right? He's not really gay. He's not really gay, right? It's not the identity. It's the ideology. You guys may have heard about this. This is, we'll go into some of these principles here. This is something that happens often. And it really works with anything. It's a rhetorical device. It's how we use language or don't use language. Motte Bailey is basically, you've got a fort, you might have a moat around it, And with the Motte and Bailey is, well, if I, in front of certain audiences and certain circumstances, I'm going to retreat and defend the fort, the castle, right? In other words, I don't say as much. I'm not as brazen with certain things. But when I'm with others, maybe people I know really well, or people that are like-minded, I can go out to the Bailey and I can be on the attack. I can advance, right? So for example, this was on MSNBC last year.
So is critical race theory, is there a K through 12 curriculum that right now is being taught? I'm sorry, I know it's a dumb question, but is there a K through 12 curriculum on critical race theory that's being taught in schools around this country?
Well, look, Joy, if it was news to most Americans that critical race theory was in K through 12, it was news to me too. I'm one of the co-authors of one of the few books on critical race theory. I think I would know.
Okay. Well, this is the NEA. We're back to the NEA, the National Education Association. Same summer, last summer, that she said this, okay? They adopted 2 business items as motions last year. This is one of them. The other one is also, the 2 that I'm talking about are both to do with critical race theory. The other one is, how do we handle parents that are fighting against us with critical race theory and anti-racism? Well, one thing we can do is we can call them domestic terrorists, right? Here's what they say in their motion. Share and publicize through existing channels information already available on critical race theory, right? Critical race theory is not being taught in classes. Well, let's back up. Provide an already created in-depth study that critiques empire, white supremacy, anti-blackness, anti-indigeneity, racism, patriarchy, cis-heteropatriarchy, capitalism, ableism, anthropocentrism, and other forms of power and oppression. We oppose attempts to ban critical race theory and or the 1619 Project. This is the largest labor union in the country. This is the teachers union that is saying this. But there's no critical race theory in K-12. It is reasonable and appropriate for curriculum to be informed by academic frameworks. Academic framework means the religion of academia. For understanding and interpreting the impact of the past on current society, including critical race theory. Over and over again, right? Conduct a virtual listening tour that will educate members on the tools and resources needed to defend honesty in education, including but not limited to tools like CRT. Including but not limited to critical race theory, right? It's all over the place. It's everywhere. But see, Motte Bailey, if I'm out in front of a large audience who doesn't ever understand everything, and I'm the person who coined critical race theory, I'm just going to say, oh, I would know. Well, I would know if it was happening, right? Identitarianism. This is such an important part of this because it's what, this is the consequence of critical social justice. It tears down your identity. How does it tear down your identity? It focuses on lesser identities instead of the most important identities. Yes, I put myself up here. The solvent of identitarianism is the solvent of society. Its ultimate destiny is the destruction of fatherhood, motherhood, masculinity, femininity, men, women, marriage, and family. It takes core principles of civilization, of Christianity, eternal principles and identities, deconstructs them by raising the value and focus of lesser identities. I've noticed this in the church in the last several years. I think that they know what is going on. Their focus is always on identity. They always bring this up. If they bring up race, they talk first about being a child of God. Right? They recognize that there is a problem with identity. And this is what a lot of the young people are struggling with. Who am I? What are all these other identities maybe I should be choosing or picking? If I move the identity values hierarchy, right, then all of a sudden being gay, being a certain race, being disabled, or anything else becomes my primary identity. And I can attach oppression to any one of those things very quickly. But I've just lost what is most sacred. In fact, President Nelson just came out in the young adult conference, right? Conference, I guess, and said there were 3 identities that we need to focus on. The first 3, which are a child of God, a child of the covenant, and a disciple of Christ. So he's focusing on identity. This was the response from that BYU Hawaii professor to my podcast. He put this up on his door in his office. Anti-racism, the course racists want to cancel. I never said a single thing about race in that podcast. Not a single thing. But see, because I critiqued his ideology and what he was saying, what he was teaching, what he was activating the students with, I know exactly what he taught. I have the syllabus, and I have several students who are in that class, who have been in that class. I am a racist, and those who are my sources there at BYU Hawaii are racists, because we might want to cancel them, which we didn't try to do either, right? We never want to cancel them. But see, that's the issue. It has nothing to do with this. He knows it has nothing to do with this. It has to do with ideology, but he's going to bring identity into it. And this is a big one too. Equality versus equity. What's the difference? Equality would be for opportunity. What's at the front end? Equity is what's at the back end. Let me give you a clear example of this here that happened here it happened at BYU. I've got a lot of BYU examples. There's a professor that at BYU who said she's trying to get her students, it's on video, she's trying to get her students to go out and vote and protest and do a number of things for a certain bill in the state of Utah that was trying to be passed. It had to do with clean air and requiring a certain number of electric cars on the road. Okay. Why did she push this so hard? It wasn't just because of the environmental issues that she probably subscribes to. She said the reason it is because if we don't do it, it will be a racist move not to get involved with this. Why would it be racist? Because black individuals in the state of Utah and everywhere across the country have a higher rate of asthma than other races do. So if we don't get electric cars, we are racist because there's going to be more of a problem with asthma for a certain race. That's the difference between looking at the beginning and looking at the end and then trying to say this is the result and this is how we need to change something. It's dangerous. What are the reasons there's more asthma there? Let's find that out. This is from Dallin H. Oaks, one of my favorite quotes. The equality of God is not the equal outcomes for all, but the equal opportunity for all. This is a really important distinction with this. If you find something that is focused on equity, or even uses the word equity, it requires force. It requires even an ounce of tyranny to be able to get equal outcomes. Right? It's the only way it happens because of natural law, because of choice, right? We should be focusing on equality of opportunity, and then there is something that's missing. There is something that's missing there that you would need to add to that, and that is charity. What about those that do struggle? What about those that do have problems, even though they have the opportunity, or maybe there's some that don't have enough of an opportunity? Then we need to work with that. But you don't go to the extreme on the other end and focus on the outcome. And this is a big deal for me right now, is trying to get people to say something and to do something. I believe that, and I use education as an example because I've studied several states and what's going on in K-12 on this. Things are happening so fast, you're not going to recognize K-12 in the next 5 to 10 years. You will not recognize it because it's all about socializing the kids. It's all social engineering. And all of these things that you guys have been passing here in Utah, you're going to see the results of it very soon. Very soon. You've got to say something. You've got to be involved. You've got to be able to stand up. You can't just be nice, right? The people that are involved with these types of things do not have the best interest of your kids or you at heart. The NEA we just talked about, doesn't matter who you voted for. I'm not saying anything about this, but do you know who the largest donor was to Governor Cox's campaign? The NEA. Right? The NEA. He was the largest donor or they were the largest donor. Why would that be? You're going to go to a Republican candidate in Utah and support him? How's that possible? Go look at their website and try and figure out how would that be. And then look at what's going on in Utah right now and everything that's happening with the laws that are coming through, right? You've got to say something. You have to stand up for it. And you know what? You might be called a racist. You might be called a homophobe. But you've got to say something. I see this at BYU all the time. I have professors that won't say anything. I'm with you, Greg. This is great. Thanks so much for doing this. Just make sure you don't use my name. That tide is, just now, we're starting to get that to change. We're just starting to get that to move at this point. This is another thing that is really important to understand about this movement. And this is maybe the most important thing of all, I think. This is what I call Telos versus Oppressors. Where's the problem? Where is the problem in society? Telos means a progression, moving toward an end. It's your personal progression. It's you becoming something, right? That requires effort. That requires, if you're a Christian, the idea of repentance, right? The idea of change. It might be a little bit painful. It might be a little bit hard. But it's on you. It's personal responsibility, right? Well, that's hard. That's tough. I don't know if I want to deal with that. So it's a lot better if I could have a moral cause that takes it outside of me. And where does it put the problem? It puts the problem out there. So when you see these issues and you see what's going on with business, with culture, with religion, look at that. Is this going to promote individual growth, or is the focus out there on something else? Because you can't have both at the top. It doesn't mean there's not oppression. It doesn't mean that there aren't bad systems. But see, if I flip it, and the primary thing we're looking at is the oppressors around us, and liberating ourselves from the problems that are out there, that changes everything about the plan of salvation, quite frankly, right? And what we're trying to do, who we're trying to become. And we should be focusing on that thought, on the idea of who you can be if you take on your agency, if you take on that personal responsibility and the richness and the fulfillment of your life. If you can do that, it's worth it, right? It's worth it. Now, in Christianity, we're running into a lot of problems right now. We've seen it with the Methodist Church splitting, the SBC, the largest denomination in the country. I don't know if they're going to make it. The Southern Baptist Convention. I've got friends there. That convention is in a lot of trouble. I think we're looking at a split there in the next number of years or sooner. Why? Well, it's the fight over critical race theory. It's the fight over this ideology of critical social justice. And a smaller voice is gaining power, just like they always do, into higher and higher positions. And it doesn't look very good to me. I'm not optimistic about this at all. I have friends that are at the highest levels of the Church of England, and that's even worse. Very, very bad position right there. Liberation theology is taking over everything there. And that's what I'm afraid of, is that idea of liberation theology. And I want you to think about this idea of suffering. Revolution is not born from individuals who contextualize their suffering with an eternal point of view. Revolution requires outrage at suffering and the desire to make change, critique. Suffering, in essence, is not acceptable. If even an ounce of suffering is unacceptable, then the focus must be on changing the hegemonic system, the system in power, and removing the oppressors that cause the suffering. See, we understand there has to be suffering sometimes. Sometimes we have to learn lessons. Sometimes we have to go through trials and tribulations. There's purpose and there's reason behind that. If I don't have purpose and reason behind that, then how am I going to contextualize that suffering? Well, it's coming from out there. It's coming from them and them and them. And I'm outraged about it. Right? It's the individual against the collective. Now, this is where things are heading. And I get a lot of pushback on this, but I'm right. I use this as a picture here. You can see this, right? You've got Jesus over here and you've got Barabbas over here. Remember, Pilate is there and he's got the both of them. He's trying to figure out why are these elite, the elites of the Jews, mostly the Sadducees and the high priests, trying to call for Jesus' death instead of Barabbas. Well, this is the perfect example. I am convinced that the author knows exactly what he's doing here. All of the Gospels do the same thing in talking about this. One contextualizes the suffering that we have to go through and has a reason behind it. And there's a solution to it. But it's still hard. Barabbas is a Sicarii, an assassin. He is a political messiah. There were many of these at this time. He's not the only one. And he's more along the lines of what the Jews were looking for at that time. A political messiah that would conquer the oppressors, the Romans at that time, and liberate them from those oppressors. So you have the option of, am I liberated from sin personally? Do I grow personally and overcome that through the atonement and the gospel that Jesus is talking about? Or do I choose Barabbas, the political messiah who wants to get rid of the oppressors? And of course, they choose Barabbas as the one they're going to save. Liberation theology is tied very, very closely to Ibram Kendi's heart. His parents believed in liberation theology. He believes in liberation theology. When people you know are promoting, and they're in the church especially, or in Christianity, and they are promoting Ibram Kendi, remember what his tenets are, what he focuses on against the liberal order, against liberal democracy, against capitalism over and over again. That same interview they had with Angela Davis there was a student, this was at Berkeley of course, there was a student there and she says, Dr. Kendi, is there hope for change? Can we really get this change that we really need? And he gives the example of Castro. And he said, you know, Castro only had about 100 men in Cuba, and he beat off the vicious American army. Right? That was his answer. So yes, when I think about that and I hold that up, I believe there is hope. I believe that we can do this. Right? Here's what he has to say about liberation theology.
I think one of the ways we can distinguish it is one being liberation theology. In other words, Jesus was a revolutionary. And the job of the Christian is to revolutionize society. That the job of the Christian is to liberate society from the powers on earth that are oppressing humanity. Everybody understand that? So that's liberation theology in a nutshell. Savior theology is a different type of theology. The job of the Christian is to go out and save these individuals who are behaviorally deficient. In other words, we're to bring them into the church, these individuals who are doing all of these evil, sinful things, and heal them and save them. And then once we've saved them, we've done our jobs. And to me, anti-racists fundamentally reject savior theology. That goes right in line with racist ideas and racist theology.
So just think about that. When you have somebody pushing Ibram Kendi on you, or somebody who knows is pushing Ibram Kendi or pushing anti-racism, he is Mr. Anti-Racism, right? Very strong in Marxism, very strong in liberation theology. Sometimes it's him. But that would never happen in our church, right? That would never happen with the Latter-day Saints. I mean, come on. We wouldn't go for something like that. We wouldn't see that.
Sometimes it takes years of effort and work to slowly move somebody into the right direction. And especially with our family members, these people we want to be with eternally and we want to help in this life, it's valuable being gentle as we can, but at the same time being honest and real and true with them. We need to root ourselves in love and then try to connect people to, I would say, Jesus Christ, especially those that are within our family. And this will be the last thing I'll say. It comes from Ken Dee's book on page 15 in Definitions. He talks about a way of reframing about how we think about Jesus Christ that was provided by Tom Skinner. So Tom, he was a preacher from Harlem, and he says, Jesus was a radical revolutionary with hair on his chest and dirt under his fingernails. Any gospel that does not speak to the issue of enslavement and injustice and inequality, any gospel that does not want to go where people are hungry and poverty-stricken and set them free in the name of Jesus Christ is not the gospel. So you have a gospel connection with many of your family members, right? And you can help them reframe the way they think about Christ by you sharing your testimony about how you think about Christ.
Yes, that's a real BYU professor. That was open to most all students. And what is he saying? There's two things that are happening there, right? Number one, Ibram Kendi's liberation theology is the way you should reframe your idea of Jesus. You just saw what his idea is there, what that is. That book he was holding up is Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist, right? Number two, what is he telling the kids to do? What is he telling the college students to do? It's praxis. It is activism. Go home and tell your family about this. Tell your family about this new idea of reframing the doctrine of Christ and of Jesus Christ, right? That's what's happening at BYU, right? Now, finally, we'll end up here. This is one of those quick interpreters that I use on the scripture study side of my podcast. And I think that this is very applicable to what we're talking about here with critical social justice. There have been a lot of utopias out there, a lot of Aufgehobens that we've seen, especially in the 20th century. Right? You had the Nazis, you had the Soviet Union, again, you had Mao, you had Pol Pot, you had Castro, Vietnam, I've got a lot of those different places, right? There's something that has to happen here. There is, in the gospel, a progression that we go through. All men and women go through this. And some of you may already recognize what this is, but it's as core doctrine as it can possibly be. First is agency, the first phase of the priesthood. Agency is about my choice. I have to always have this. I can't ever let this go. Even in the Garden of Eden, no matter what the consequences are, that agency is protected. It is primary, right? It's about me as an individual, the agency that I have. I must have choice, even if it's to fail. The second phase is speech. This is John the Baptist crying repentance in the desert. It's his speech. He's the icon of the Aaronic priesthood. It is our speech. It's our behavior. It's our character. How we express ourselves, what we do, right? That's a second phase of the priesthood. That's the Aaronic priesthood. I would say, this is just my estimation, if I were to add another title to the Aaronic priesthood, it would be the priesthood of the individual. Okay, because it's about those things about the individual. But that's not enough for us. We continue to move on beyond that. We go beyond ourselves. We go to family. That's the first phase of the Melchizedek priesthood. Right? We've got to go through family. That's the lab for growing, for learning, for charity especially, to get beyond just ourselves by ourselves. Being an individual alone is not going to work. Even though liberation in some ways wants to push down to that, as long as we don't have our own agency. And then that's not enough. The final phase is going to Zion, right? It's community. I've got my family, and now I need to move beyond. We get this, for example, in callings in the church, or a preacher in any Christian sect or any religion, really, right? There's community. You've got to move beyond everything and go into community. This is what we need more of right here. That spiral of silence, we're not hitting phase 4 there. We need to move into the community more. Now, once we can go through all 4 of those things, all of us, then we are ready to meet God, right? Then we're ready to meet God. Now, what if I want Aufgehoben? I want the utopia, but I'm not willing to go through those hard things because I always want the problem to be out there. So what do? Well, I create a shortcut. I want to go straight to 4. So what do I need to do to go straight to 4? Well, I have to cut out the first 3. So I fight against agency. I fight against speech and expression and behavior, and character doesn't matter. And I fight against the family, because the family takes power away from the state. And if I can do those 3 things, which is never really that successful, then I can hit phase 4 by a shortcut. And you can see this in every attempt to have a utopia by man. Every single time. Now, I'm going to end with this. It's kind of depressing. I'll try and give a positive message after I do this. This is only a couple minutes long. But remember, if this is happening at BYU, think of where it's happening at other places.
And that image is of a white, self-sufficient man who embodies what I call 3 demonic virtues: possession, control, and mastery.
And we can never forget these educated women, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi, who are the founders of Black Lives Matter and the women who started this movement that has gone worldwide and has reshaped many things in our society.
I owe my respect to folks from the Black Panther Party for their development of social programs that have helped to alleviate food insecurity in our nation for years.
Dr. Alana Linton is an anti-racist, race-critical scholar who works on the critical theorization of race, racism, and anti-racism.
Increasing the public's understanding of race must, I think, be accompanied by a radical reorganization of a society in ways that undo current arrangements of exploitation that maintain and deepen white supremacy.
As a parent, I would encourage you to seriously question these distinctions. But that needed variety is lost when the adults in corporate worlds define some toys as for boys and others as for girls. So how do we talk to our kids about gender? I'm convinced that one of the most effective tools at our disposal, especially for parents of daughters, is feminism.
So this past conference made clear, if it wasn't already clear from what President Nelson and other general authorities have said over the last few years, that this type of work, the work of anti-racism, is a religious imperative. And they, a number of the brethren and female leaders of the church offered, some ideas that really fit, I think, really well with what Kendi's saying.
But since the 1990s, we've seen individuals kind of take this and turn it into a global conspiracy, where the goal of cultural Marxism is to destroy Western values and traditions. So like capitalism, authority, morality, patriotism, liberalism.
It's also difficult to disentangle race from the modern capitalist system, and all capitalism, as Ruth Wilson Gilmore writes, is of course racial capitalism.
And the first step that you can do is to stop saying, oh, I'm not racist, right? In fact, if you want to spot a racist, that's the first thing they'll do is they say, oh, I'm not racist.
And that is the struggle over and the fight with the image of the white self-sufficient man, or more precisely, the struggle over white self-sufficient masculinist intellectual form.
This individuals that fall back on this liberalism kind of frame race-based issues as in the language of liberalism so they can appear moral.
Okay. Get on board with that kind of stuff. And you can take my word for it, or you can listen to my main man, Russ, here. My main man, Russ, is probably one of the strongest advocates for everything that I just said.
That is manifesting everywhere, very quickly, right? In every institution in the United States. And it is happening at a breakneck speed. All I want to say about this here is that as these things are brought into a family, a traditional family is about identity. There are roles. There are identities that we work through within a family. You have parents, you have children, you have brothers, you have sisters, you have a husband, you have a wife, you have grandparents. All of that is being broken down through this. This identitarianism, a core part of critical social justice, is breaking those identities of the family down. We see that specifically with gender. Very much so with gender. You know, it's interesting. I've got one of my favorite artists is Efremov, and he's a Russian artist that kind of just very bright colors. But I got these two paintings in our front room, and they're very simple, really bright colors. But what is in them is, one, you have a couple that are walking down a path in a park. And they've stopped, it looks like, and she's got her little leg kicked back here like this as she's kissing her companion here, her guy here, who's a little taller than her. And I asked her, why do you put that up there? That's kind of like it's, you know, that affection or something in your front room that's kind of odd. And I've got another one, the same artist that's in there, and there's a couple that's walking with her hand in hand, right? That they're, and same bright colors, and they're also, you know, walking down a path in a park. And the reason I love it so much is because I think it's going away. I think it's going away, and I think it's going to go away fast. And so it's sacred to me. And it's going to become more and more sacred to us as we lose that, as those things are lost. Family is where identitarianism is targeted. Last thing, the emperor does have no clothes. There are no clothes. And you know what? Too many people won't say it. You walk around, the emperor's naked as can be, and oh yeah, this is great. I have compassion for this. I have empathy for that. I'm not going to say anything. Look at all the fingers that are going to point at me if I say something. Yeah, I'll go along with it. The emperor has no clothes. All those fingers and that shaming that are pointing at me, I'm standing next to this tree, and all these fingers are pointing at me over there from this really large building. Right? But maybe I ought to step away from the tree a little bit more, and then the fingers won't point at me. We need to stand up. We need to say things. We need to do things. I hope you get involved in your community. I hope you'll say something when you see it, when you recognize it. Think of these principles. There's only a few here that we went over from, this is built off of a workshop that I built. So there's much more to this, but think of those few principles. You can recognize it if you understand those principles. And then you can articulate it and you can contrast it with what you're saying and what real truths are in there. I appreciate your time and thanks for coming tonight. We've got a few minutes if you guys want, if there's any questions or any questions that you might have, I could answer those or try to answer those. Or anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I was curious if you said in the next 5 to 10 years you think education will be majorly different. Do you think that there will also be, over the next 5 to 10 years, as that change happens, that there will be a reaction from the population where people will start to speak up and start to, you know, I'm just curious, do you think that'll happen?
I don't think it'll happen enough, I'll be honest. I'm pessimistic about it because I don't see people standing up. I just don't see it. And I had a great meeting today with a number of people where it was like, okay, well, here's a few people that are really dedicated to this, like really dedicated to fighting this. But there aren't that many people that will do it. It's hard work. It's a lot of work. The problem I see going down 5 years from now or 10 years from now is when you have the voices that will, I think there will be more voices, but those voices come up and some things change. I think that as this critical social justice encroaches more and more on education, it's one of those 5 pillars of Gramsci, I think there's going to be an exodus of a lot of families that are going to be going into charter schools and homeschooling. So what's going to happen then? They're going to go after the charter schools and they're going to go after the homeschooling. They want access to your kids. And they're coming at it from every angle possible: ethnic studies, SEL, therapy, and mental health. And everybody, Utah's one of the worst. As I've seen it, I would say there's 3 of the worst states in the country. As far as, maybe not manifesting yet, but as far as what's in their language and what they've passed already. And that's California, Illinois, and Utah. Okay, Utah is, the next 2 or 3 years in Utah are going to be, and you're not going to see it all everywhere all at once, but as far as the power entrenchment and the policies and what's going to be in place over the next 2 or 3 years, I would be very, very concerned with things.
I just have a question about the liberation idea, I guess. You know how you were saying, I'm going to redefine this chair or whatever, right? But it's coming in the way of sexuality and, you know, I'm like, how are these ideas, is it just to be super confusing all the time? Like, you don't ever have something that's validating? Because I just see so many things that I'm like, there's no logic in where they're trying to push people, but people are like so reactive to it, saying, oh, this is the best thing yet. You know.
Logic has nothing to do with it. That's the problem. So I've argued with these fully, you've got different levels of things, right? You've got the theologians, you've got the preachers, and you've got the practitioners. They're all on this spectrum that are out there, right? I've argued with the theologians. And it doesn't matter what logic comes in. See, logic doesn't matter. Logic is not a part of postmodernism. They hate logic. They fight logic. They see it as being white and Western. And that's why they hate the Enlightenment, right? They fight against the Enlightenment. They fight against science. They fight against math, right? Because those are absolute truths, or at least close to absolute truths. They do not believe in an absolute truth. When I say my truth and your truth, what's more important? There's no, logic only matters if there's absolute truth. If there's a truth underneath it. If it's all what I feel is the truth, then you can't argue off of logic. Not at that end of the spectrum. You can't use logic. What you have to talk about are principles. What do you want? Is this worth it to you? Do you want this? Do you want to grow? Do you think that overcoming adversity is a positive thing, or is it just a bad thing? Right? You have to break things down all the way to the very fundamental levels, I think, as far as if someone's all the way over on the theological side. If they're just a practitioner, which is the majority of everybody, of critical social justice, because they really don't know where it comes from or what it is, then that's different. Then logic probably works a lot better.
I just think they're targeting kids and young kids and all of these different methods and pornography and pedophile and all that stuff. I'm like, it's so I just don't, I can't quite grasp my head around so many people finding this, liberating. You know what I mean? Like.
That's because that's the problem in Utah. I'm just going to tell you, that's the problem in Utah. You think that can't, how does somebody be like that? How can they do that? And in Utah especially, you've got a culture like, we're all nice. They don't really mean this. There's no way that they could actually want this, and they do. Okay, they do. And if you don't understand that, then that's one reason why people don't fight. They don't really get it. There are people trying to rob innocence from children. They believe it's the right thing because it is liberating. It will liberate them at a younger age. And sexuality has everything to do with that liberation. And that's why you see things from sexual orientation to transgenderism to the breakdown of monogamy. It's all liberation of your identity and expression from anything that would hold you back from the way that you feel. Right? It is a liberation, and they are focused on that, especially with the kids. I have got video, I haven't put it out yet, but there's, just absolute, we're coming after your kids, we want to come after your kids, and here's why we're doing it, and you don't stand a chance, right? I'll go right here first.
The words like love, kindness, tolerance, inclusion, they've kind of become bastardized and weaponized, even in the church. Even local leaders, upper levels of church leadership, and this may require you to speculate, but how well do you think the church leadership understands the underpinnings of this agenda, of what's really happening?
Are we still recording? Well, let me put a disclaimer out here first, right? I don't know, but I do have some channels there. And I think some know more than others. I think they all know the problem. Again, the whole focus on identity, there's a reason for that. I know that's what they're doing. Right back there.
So, okay, disclaimer, I'm LDS, so this is a question for the audience. Having come here, we'll just say I grew up in the mission field as they grew up here. But having come here, my outside impression is, as members of the church, we seem to be far more willing to fight with each other at a church basketball game or over the Utes and Cougars, as opposed to fighting with those outside of the church who we hope to convert. And I think that becomes a huge problem because we just aren't willing to look at something and say, yeah, that's evil. I need to stand up. Just my opinion.
Yeah, that's true. There's this, and I think, honestly, I didn't grow up in the Mountain West, but I think especially in the Mountain, I've lived here a little bit. There's and this is pervasive, I think, throughout LDS culture, but I think especially in the Mountain West, there's this really super high value of nice. And it's like, I'm buttoned up, I'm nice, and it's like, it's this value. And it's hard for me to understand that. I didn't grow up like that, right? I don't understand, and that doesn't mean that you're some rebel. You have to be some rebel on the other end of the spectrum, but I think it's a problem. I think it's a real niceness to me is I'm going to say this is local here, right? I think niceness is a bad value. I think it's a horrible value. I'll tell you what's a great value is kindness, right? Kindness is active. Kindness is active. Niceness is passive and polite. And I really think for us to win, not just against critical race theory and these other things, but to actually survive the last days, we will have to change that. I don't see any other way around it, or we're just going to get consumed. The storm is just going to come right through us, and we're not going to be prepared for it, and we're not going to be able to take care of it. We're right here first.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for all your efforts and your talents of getting your head around this and articulating it to us. I've appreciated it so much, and making this available because it wants to be opaque. It's hard to understand it, and that you've done that work for us. And I understand. I'm going to keep trying to communicate the best that I can, but I know that if I've spent hours and hours and hours understanding it, it's hard to give somebody understanding in a short time. And if you connect dots for them, sounds like a conspiracy theory. So this
And they'll call you a conspiracy. They'll tell you it is.
something that, with your help and our prayer and efforts, that we can succeed. Light succeeds over darkness, and I want to thank you for making this possible.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, July 1st, there will be written tools, right? So, July 1st, written tools that you can grab and that you can use. Okay. All right, back there first.
Oh, just a comment. I notice all throughout my neighborhood there are all these multicolored flags flying in many of my neighbors' homes. And I think to myself, do they even know or understand what they're advocating flying that flag? Members, non-members, but I believe that to them it says, I'm a good person. I care.
Yeah.
And there's no flag for us to fly.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's what I would say about the flag, right? I think that most people are very sincere about that. I think they're very sincere, and they're trying to show compassion and support for people that maybe have been marginalized in the past, and I get that. I think that's important. The problem is, like anything else, there's a spectrum of understanding, right? You have people that will say, I can't stand the flags because they have a problem with anybody having and experiencing same-sex attraction on one end, and another person who doesn't want to, or has a problem with the flag because they do see the entire picture, and they have a problem with saying, do you understand everything that goes along with this? And that's where I stand, right? If you followed the podcast, right, I have a number of gay individuals that have come onto the podcast, and I talk with them. Everyone so far that I've talked to is a strong member of the church, right? And so they experience same-sex attraction, and because there's nobody, you don't get that out there, right? It's almost everyone who has, it's either one side or the other. Well, if you have experienced same-sex attraction, if you identify as gay, then you're over on this end and you should be fighting against the church, right? And on the other end, you might have people that say, well, what in the world? They just need to repent. And even if they're living the covenants as well as I am or better. And it's like, what are you talking about? You don't understand. Everybody has issues. Everybody has problems. Everybody has things they have to overcome and work with in this life and in this mortality. So there's a spectrum that goes along there. I don't use that, right? Because I do support several people that would identify as gay and have same-sex attraction and et cetera. I support North Star, which is an organization, they just met last week or the week before here in Salt Lake, and they do that every year. And they are very faith-centered, very covenant path-centered, and they get hundreds of people there at that convention every year, right, that experience these things. I've spoken with these people. It is heartbreaking. It's hard, and it's like, I can't believe you have this and you do this and you deal with this, and yet you are a strong member of the church. And you go through this constantly from all these people on the spectrum that's against them. Those that tell them fight against the church and get out of the church, and those that are in the church and tell them, what are you doing? Don't act this way, don't think this way, or if you experience this at all, it's a sin. And so they have to deal with all of that all the time, and what a horrible thing. Right? So I don't fly the flag, even though I support those people, because I do know everything that goes along with it. And I don't want to do that. I'd rather put my arm around some of them that I know and love and say, hey, how are you doing, and support them individually, as individuals, than a collective that means something that ultimately is a fight against the church. And it's a fight against the traditional family. BYU is in a position right now where very closely, we'll see if it happens. I don't know that it will, but there is a move right now, and it has a lot of force, and unless the higher ups get involved with this, which they have done from time to time, every single student at BYU in a GE course will be required to take diversity, equity, inclusion. And it is not, again, it's not about, let's be nice to everybody. It is indoctrination. And so we're that close right now. Again, we're that close to something like that happening, which would change that campus forever.
Two questions. I think you answered this already. As you said, there were going to be written materials available. Is this presentation going to be available as well for either electronic or PDF download?
Yeah, this will be on the podcast next week. This will be up on.
And the second question is what is the movement besides the petition to get this into the institute or into this training into the program, into the colleges?
Into the colleges?
Yes, into whether we...
You're talking about the church colleges?
Church colleges or anything. I think you've got a good system here that you could literally, especially this one on the roots of critical theory and everything else. This could, you could go through YAF program or something else. I'm just wondering what are some potential things that you're thinking of?
So the reason I wouldn't go through YAF or any of those programs is because it's too political and it's too one-sided. And I just stay away from that. I'm not party specific. I don't like political parties, honestly. So that wouldn't be something that would work for me. Any other questions?
I just want to follow up. When you said, when I asked about, in 5 years, people are saying it's hard to get people to speak up because they want to be nice and they don't see this for what it is. But then you're saying in 5 or 10 years, things will be so radical. So the people now who don't see it for what it is, aren't they going to see it for what it is when it becomes radicalized? And won't they start to speak up? That's what I'm wondering. Is this, even in the church where people all want to be nice, at some point, when do people reach their threshold where they're like, okay, I'm done, and they start fighting?
Well, I don't know. But there's a couple of other dynamics that are in there. Number one, how many of those people are going to be converted to the new religion of academia? Right? There will be a lot of them. I'm just telling you right now, I'll be really blunt, there will be people in this room that will be converted to it soon, right? It's going to happen because it's going to gain more and more power and strength, and there's nothing, we haven't seen anything like this. This is so different because most all revolutions, and this is all about revolution, it is all about the revolution, and they will all talk about the revolution when they're not on national TV, right? It's all about the revolution. They're not going to talk about it in publicly, but they'll talk about it in their books. They'll talk about it in their papers, and they'll write about it. The dynamic there is the revolution is happening culturally without violence, right? They learned in the 60s, the Black Panther Party, the Weather Underground, and others. They learned that that's not going to work. They're going to be turned on very, very quickly. So they're not looking for a physical, violent revolution. They're looking for just the cultural revolution. And different from a Maoist cultural revolution, they're trying to do it peacefully, right, without force. Well, it's not without force, but it's a new mindset. It's a change and it's a conversion of people. So a lot of those people are going to change, I would say. And it's a horrible thing to believe, or how much hope do you really have in that? Well, I do have hope in it, but I think you have to be practical and understand that there's going to be a lot of people that will change to that. Secondly, the closer you get to that, to it being more radical and bigger changes, is it more along the lines of a frog in warm water that starts to boil? And is it too late? When is it too late? All these revolutions, all these things that change happen from a minority. Right? The Bolsheviks had a small group in Russia in 1917, but they got in the right positions and they made power, and that's what is being attempted. They need to get on they're trying to get on the school boards, they're trying to get in the governorships, they're trying to get into any position that's going to give them power and strength. And then how much power do you have? How much power do you have when they have all the power? I don't know that. I think the only way this works, I really think the only way that we stop this and turn this is by changing hearts and minds. It might be one-on-one constantly. I don't think there's another way to do it. By teaching and educating and creating awareness as much as possible. Again, if I've got the hydra and I cut off the head, another head's going to grow. unless I have that, unless I get the sword into the body and into the ideology itself, it's just going to keep growing. It's going to keep going. They're already so far entrenched in positions of institutions. I mean, look at the Fortune 500 companies. Isn't it interesting? You know, you think there's the phrase of, boy, this isn't your grandma's rock and roll, right? This isn't your grandma's music or something like that, right? Well, with the Fortune 500 company, I would say this isn't your little brother's or your little sister's Fortune 500 company. Remember, what's the Wall Street protests? Occupy Wall Street. Remember Occupy Wall Street? Why hasn't that happened again? What was that, 2009, 2010? 12, 13 years ago? Why hasn't that happened again? Why aren't they targeting Wall Street? No need. Right? That's how fast it's happening. This is that institution of business. Look at Disney, right? Everybody knows about Disney. It's so far further along than you think it is. It really is. It's so far along, and unless we can provide the awareness and the education on these types of things, we're going to lose. We'll lose our culture.
Have you read Marcuse's essay on liberation?
His what? Essay on liberation, sure.
We're living in that, and so to add to what you just said, and I'll stand up so everyone can hear this, but who knows what a cuckoo bird is? If you've ever heard a cuckoo clock, cuckoo, that's what a cuckoo bird is. The way they nest is they actually lay their eggs in someone else's nest. And the egg looks innocuously enough like the other eggs so that the mama bird will actually incubate that egg. And then this thing hatches. And at first it sort of looks like the other chicks, ugly and wrinkly. Then this chick starts to grow exponentially faster than the others. And it eventually throws the other chicks out of the nest so that they actually receive all the care from the mom. This is the way the ideology works. It looks like the other eggs in the nest. It feels good. It doesn't do good. It feels like empathy. It feels like niceness, which is actually Dr. Peterson calls that agreeableness, which actually invites aggression. And so it's going to feel like you're doing good when you embrace these ideas. But you're actually throwing the chicks out of the nest. It's actually throwing the chicks out of the nest so that it gets all the resources. And Graham, you nailed it. You go in and you subvert the culture, perfect the language, and then you've got the utopia. So that's how it gets in. And thank you so much, Graham.
Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah. The one thing I skipped a little section here is one of the other principles I talk about on the scripture study side is I call the Nehor principle. And I talked about Korihor and Nehor a little bit and why there's a difference there. But if you really study the Book of Mormon, what's interesting is you have in the Nephites a line of royalty. It starts off with kings, starting with Nephi. You have these succession of kings coming all the way down until you get into the reign of the judges, right? Even the chief judges, though, are in that same line. You'll notice as they want to hire or they want to bring in a new judge when one's going to die, who do they have to go to? The sons. It's only the sons that are up, right? It's not like we're going to have an open campaign for everybody. It is royalty. It's a line of succession that's going to happen there. So you have those that are fighting this patriarchy, right? And those are the dissenters. And if you notice what happens with them, every single breakoff group is anti-Christ. Every single one of them is anti-Christ. They're against the doctrine of Christ, including the other antichrist that people don't talk about, which are King Noah and Amulon, his chief priest. Right? They're all anti-Christ. That's the whole reason Abinadi is there preaching to them. He's talking about the doctrine of Christ. And they kill him not because he's being mean and telling them to repent. They kill him for blasphemy, because he says that Christ will come down and be born of a woman and take on the sins of the world. That's why they kill him, right? But the difference there is they're transforming something already in place. People say, I like the idea more of this as a cancer or something like that. You know, fine, I guess. But the reason I like virus so much better is because they use the term virus. And they say, this is a virus. We want it to be a virus. And this is how it works, just like a virus works. There's plenty of papers that are written by critical social justice warriors and academics that talk about this as a virus. And they're proud about it, right? A virus needs a host, like the cuckoo bird, right? They need a nest. You've got to have a host. So it's not a matter of killing it off. It's a matter of transforming it. It's a matter of changing it. What is the host going to become? Now, eventually it becomes a zombie, something else. And that's what this is. It's going to, Gramsci knew you can't fight the West. Capitalism, and he says this, and so does Marcuse, right? The West is too strong. Capitalism and liberal democracy work too well for us to win this over through any traditional type of revolution. We have to work with what it is and use it against itself in order to make the transformation on this. And it's exactly what's happening today. So, any other questions? Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. Have a great weekend.